It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Steve Zimmer. He is a member of the school board for Los Angeles Unified. And to say that you had a crazy election in March could only be described as an understatement. I read about your race in the New York Times. Yeah. I mean, something is happening if an LA school board race is in the New York Times.
Yeah,
what happened?
Well, I think that the good part of it is that people are really paying attention to public education.
Right.
And the issues surrounding public education. There is another part of it that is about whether or not we can have informed substantive debate around the issues that are the tipping point issues in public education.
What's so interesting is there was a lot of funding in your race coming from the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. Mm-hmm. Now, we have known Mr. Bloomberg to fund candidates that are supportive of gun control.
Right.
In this region, for example, Gloria Negrete-McLeod took out sitting Congressman Joe Baca as a result, some would argue, of funding on gun control.
Yeah.
We didn't know. I mean, he is not necessarily known for funding education reform candidates,
right.
But somehow he's been doing this.
Yeah, I tried to find out why the mayor of New York was so interested in a school board race in Los Angeles. I never found out why, but I assume that it has to do with teacher union politics and wanting to make sure that there was a reform candidate that was in the seat.
And what's interesting about you, I followed your career, I have never perceived, and I don't think there's a general perception, that you've been in the pocket of the teachers unions.
No, I look at issues through the lens of what's best for kids and their families. And I've been, I've been described as a moderate and someone who tries to be a bridge builder between the two different camps. And so I was very surprised that folks came out so strongly against the concept of compromise, collaboration, and really trying to bridge the divide between the two.
And I have to tell you, I
camps.
personally live in the communities in which you represent, and wow, I mean, the signs were everywhere. There were more signs in your race than there were for the mayor's race.
That's true.
It was really remarkable. I was getting flooded with emails and stuff. So you were able to pull it out, though.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the things that happened is instead of going towards the substance of the issues, whether it be charter schools, whether it be teacher evaluation, these are all very important debates that have many valid perspectives on both sides. And I'm happy to engage around my voting record on those issues. Unfortunately, the folks who tried to take me out targeted the layoffs that we had to do because of the budget cuts, and also just some real distortions in my voting record. And I think what happened was when the big money came in, from Mayor Bloomberg, from Rupert Murdoch, from
Rupert Murdoch.
I mean, it was crazy. From Eli Broad, from Michelle Rhee, from both local, state, national folks. I think folks on the ground. And one of the most interesting things for me was I had some folks going door to door, working my phone banks, who really disagree with me on some issues. And what they said to me was, I don't always support you, but I know you think carefully about these issues, and I'll be damned if I have my democracy taken away from me. And so it was really this pushback against the big money.
And as I understand it, you did run a grassroots campaign, which is not easy in a district the size of LAUSD number, what's your seat number?
District 4.
Which includes how many voters?
Oh, I mean, well over 600,000 voters. And so I mean, we really targeted in about 70 precincts. Because of the funding, my opponent was able to target every precinct.
Right.
But we really targeted in. We really spent time talking to people. We didn't do the typical, go to the door, 3-minute conversation, leave. We really encouraged our folks to tell their story, to talk about their children, their public schools, if they were teachers, their classroom, what they've been through these past 5 years.
So how'd you slay the dragon?
I really think it was about folks being able to speak truth to power and really recapturing the idea that a democratically elected school board is something that we all should support. A system of checks and balances as we transform public education is really important. And someone who thoughtfully approaches the hardest issues around public education is someone that we want on the school board, even if we don't always agree.
And I want to talk about funding and transformation as you discussed,
Sure.
because as you know, Governor Brown has proposed really what is a revolution
It is.
in education funding. What he wants to do is he wants to have all schools start at kind of a base grant.
Yep.
And then schools that have students that either are English language learners or come from economically disadvantaged homes, a kicker for each one of those
Yes.
students.
Yes.
But if a school district has 50% or more of those students,
Yes.
they get an additional kicker.
Yeah.
What do you think about this change to local control funding?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very, very important for LAUSD and districts who have just been crushed in the latest round of education funding crisis.
But here's what's interesting, though, because LAUSD serves such a diverse population, both economically well-heeled
Yes.
and economically,
Yeah.
disadvantaged.
Yes.
These well-heeled areas will benefit from these changes in formulas that are supposed to advantage less well-heeled areas. So
The interesting thing about LAUSD in my district, there, eventually we'll get to a school-based, locally weighted student formula. Meaning that if a school has a higher percentage of English learners or special education students,
is that under the governor's formula, or would that be
that
LAUSD
will be the
initiative?
LAUSD initiative, but it will. Remember, the governor's formula is a proposal right now.
I know
it's
that, yes.
It's kind of a,
Right.
and the very issue that you brought up is going to be a centerpiece of the debate in the legislature.
And I do want to ask you this, and at the risk of sounding elitist, and if it is, that's fine, but I think about really bright kids, and a bored, bright kid is a big troublemaker.
Absolutely.
And so, under this formula, bright kids aren't getting more funding.
Right.
And they have needs as well, and they can be as disruptive and
Oh, yeah.
distracting.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. GATE education, highly gifted and talented
Right.
education, is a very specialized area. It takes very special training. We've actually exempted teachers from layoffs who have that specialized training because we recognize how important it is.
But
it's
if-
our responsibility,
Right.
Brad, to make sure that as this real kind of civil rights funding agenda that the governor has goes through, that we make sure on the local level, whether it's the gifted and talented students that you're talking about or students in foster care,
Right.
that what we understand on the ground, that we make adjustments
But
for.
explain, if you may, because part of this whole formula is that there's more discretion given
That's
to
right.
school boards.
That's right.
But presumably LAUSD would get the double kicker because they'll have one for 35% more for each student, then 35% more because it's 50% more impacted.
Yeah.
Can you then spend that money as you choose, or do you have to spend the kickers on the students identified as English language learners, free and reduced lunch, foster kids?
So we certainly will have to follow certain guidelines. But the thing about LAUSD that really does, there's a lot of things about being a large district that are very, very difficult.
Sure.
One of the advantages is that we can make sure that we, within our budget flexibilities, can hold certain programs harmless, can use monies in
Despite this formula?
Yeah, no, I think what we're going to be able to look at is how can we maximize our resources for the students with the most need under this formula. How can we then, with other kinds of funding mechanisms, make sure that what we recognize on the ground as unique needs,
Right.
Whether it be at the different ends of the spectrum, we will have, with the type of operating budget that we have, the ways to make sure all kids are served by this. But let me be very clear.
Right.
The schools who have served students with the most need have suffered the most under this budget
We've heard
crisis.
that. And will you come back
we
and
have
talk more about it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd
His
love
name
to
is
do
Steve
that.
Zimmer. He is a member of the Los Angeles Unified School Board. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition.
How many categorical programs would be impacted by Governor Brown's proposed changes to the local control funding formula? Up to 20, up to 30, up to 40, or up to 50? Governor Brown's proposal would permanently eliminate bureaucratic requirements associated with 40 to 50 categorical programs.
It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're joined by David Vela. He is a candidate for the Community College Board in Los Angeles. He has advanced to a runoff. That election will be held on May 21st. You came in first place against an incumbent who is also advancing. Wow, what went right?
Well, I think we did what the playbook says, and that is that you really run a really tough campaign, and we did that. We went everywhere where my opponents had a stronghold and a base. I went to talk to them, not even with the hopes of getting endorsed by the many community groups, but just for them to know my name.
And for the LA Community College Board, you run district-wide, or is it by district?
Right, it's district-wide. It's the largest district in the country, and as a matter of fact, it's costly on your vehicle. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it includes what areas? Is it all of LA? It's not all of LA County, but it's significant portions of LA County.
Right. It covers about 5 million residents. It has all of the city of LA. Some parts are cut off, and then 46 surrounding cities. And so it was really very interesting.
9 community colleges.
9.
Which is a significant number. I mean, in the state, there are about 22 or 32 or whatever. Oh, that's community college districts.
Districts, right.
Yeah, so there's 112 colleges, actually.
Right. So a lot of the times, community college districts are actually in charge of just one community college. This is very unique in that there is more than one. There is 9.
Right.
And so
it's almost 10% of the entire system.
It's almost 10% with the $3.5 billion budget. It's a large district.
So as you went around and spoke with the 5 million voters that you had to speak with, what were they saying to you? What are their hopes and dreams and fears for the district?
When you peel the onion, what really came out of this campaign was that people are really tired of the status quo. Students are having to wait 2 to 3 years if they want to transfer over to Cal State or UC. There's a disconnect. Courses are not available. Really, a lot of the residents were saying, this is what we need to be different, David. We really want you to go in there and ensure that our students come in and they meet their educational goals, whether they're vocational or transfer.
So we do know that Prop 30 passed in November, and some of that money is dedicated to community colleges. We also know the governor has proposed a budget with more money to community colleges. So do you feel as if we are plugging the holes of the last few years or just limiting the bleeding?
It really is about just limiting the bleeding, and I'll tell you why. Throughout the district, there were cuts going on 4 to 5 years ago, and one of the things that you can see is that when you look at the actual jobs that are still in existence and some that have been cut, we have not been able to backfill, and that affects the course availability we were talking about. So if you had an adjunct professor that got laid off because there was no longer, a swimming course or a course for a math program, those people are now having to, fight harder to take that class. So.
And let me ask you about course availability. Public Policy Institute of California just came out with a study about the community colleges, and it was really eye-opening. And one point they made is that about 20% of course sections were down since 2008. That's a huge amount.
Huge.
Could they come back? At least a significant portion of them?
I think a significant portion if the Board of Trustees, which I plan on winning on May 21st, and getting in there and diverting that money from the bureaucracy, from the downtown administration over to the classroom. If there isn't a mandate from the Board of Trustees, then the money could, it take a while to get into course availability. So that is a big challenge for the LACCD.
You may or may not know, there is a bill circulating right now by Dos Williams of Santa Barbara. And it's been sponsored by Long Beach City College, which is a fine system, I'm sure you know that. And what that bill would allow is for Long Beach to act as a pilot for a program to permit intersession classes and charge the students the non-resident rate, which would be 3 to 4 times higher than the normal rate. What's your sense of that plan?
And at LACCD, we're a different animal than Long Beach City College. In LACCD, any pilot program like that would affect the students there. I've got to tell you that I just met with the president of Pasadena City College, Mark Rocha, and we were talking about their pilot programs. They have one exclusively, it's an honors pathway where they take students in honors programs and accelerate them throughout. You know, LA Community College, we because we don't honor the jurisdiction lines, anyone can go to any community college. A lot of the neighboring community colleges, like Long Beach PCC, have an advantage because the good students are going to their colleges. So in this case, for Long Beach, it could work out, and it's probably something that I would support, but not at LACCD.
Why?
Well, I think that our students are of low income. I think that our students are having a tough time paying their dues now.
But at the same time, if I may, the program could arguably fill holes where if a class is impacted, you'd have to wait another year to get that class. If you could take it intersession, even if it's more money, you're graduating sooner, presumably, so it could be a money saver in the end.
You know, that's a good point, but you know, I was a college student, and when you're used to a certain amount of tuition, and you know, if there was another amount of money to pay, it's going to be tough for students to do that. I understand some can, and it probably will save them money at the end. But you know, it's this whole concept of pay as you go, and that's what a lot of our students are having to do right now.
At the same time, as you said, we are kind of stopping the bleeding, but we still are leaking, if I can use that terrible metaphor. And I want to get a sense, though, about where we go from here. Because even though the cuts have stopped, there's no doubt that the community college system remains underfunded.
Absolutely.
And there are different revenue streams that could be looked upon. More money from the state, increase fees. We've already done that, but we could still do that. A parcel tax. Do you believe that LACCD, as an example of any college system, will need to find more funding to maintain or improve its status?
Absolutely, and that's what, being a consensus builder myself, I am going to be talking to the different stakeholders about doing that. Look, we could do many things. One is we can centralize fundraising. Right now, all colleges are individually responsible for fundraising, and they open their own foundations.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I recently learned that community colleges are now really getting into the fundraising business.
Right.
You may have read a couple of years ago, Bakersfield College, I think, raised $14 million, which was a huge number for community college. I know PCC, Mark Rocha, I've spoken with, you know, has been looking to raise, I think he's doubled his goal to $4 million. Amen, but those are still small numbers in the scheme of fundraising for universities and colleges.
But I think it's a good start, and I think one of the things that is needed also is some sort of branding. I think LACCD is you have the name Los Angeles attached, and so there's a lot of power in that. And fundraising is not limited to foundations and, you know, alumni drives. I think what we're talking about is also going up and asking for the big foundations nationwide, DC, having people represent us there, grants that have not been captured before, applying as 9 colleges together for larger grants versus each college.
What about asking voters to be generous and turning to them? There are discussions in Sacramento to lower the threshold to pass a tax. I mean, there's a lower threshold for some categories of schools, but to make that more uniform to 55%, presumably that could be easier. Is that something that you would support, allowing districts to seek a tax at a lower threshold?
I would support that, absolutely. I think voters are, you know, they're a bit tired of being taxed, but I think that we've got a lot of communication to do at LACCD. We are the largest community college district in America, and we need to tell our story. We're a great institution. I think that LACCD, I'm not there at the Board of Trustees yet, but I can tell you that people work hard there. How they communicate it to the voters and the public is a big challenge. And I think they are going to be able to do that in the near future. Investing in the opportunity to communicate is something that should be done.
His name is David Vela. He's a candidate for the Los Angeles Community College District. That election is held on May 21st. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition.
What percentage of community college students graduate with an associate's degree within 3 years? Fewer than 5 in 10, fewer than 4 in 10, fewer than 3 in 10, or fewer than 2 in 10. Fewer than 3 in 10 community college students graduate with an associate's degree within 3 years.
It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest is Bob Bruesch. He is a member of the school board at Garvey School District, which is an elementary K-8 school district in the Rosemead area, part of Los Angeles County. And you have been in education your entire life. You were a teacher for, 38 years?
Yep.
You've been on the school board for 10 years. Sir, what have you seen over these many years?
There's been a few changes.
Few, just a couple.
Well, to tell you, the first assignment I had at Garvey, I was in a self-contained 7th grade in a classroom where I taught 7th grade everything with 37 kids.
Wow.
And we were in small rooms, no windows, and no air conditioning. So when the temperatures rose...
It can be hot in Rosemead.
Oh yeah, sticky.
Yeah.
And at that time, we had just started some of the new programs, Head Start and like that, were just coming out of the federal government. That was the Great Society.
Sure.
And the Teacher Corps was there and all like that. So I've been through quite a lot of change,
Right now, I mean, every generation we see change. Right now, the big push in changing education deals with standardized tests. We know that in 2001, with No Child Left Behind, there was a tremendous emphasis put on standardized tests, and many school districts, as a result of that program, had been at risk of being deemed failures, a technical term. Now there's a pushback that maybe we're too over-reliant on standardized tests. But at the same time, there are those that want standardized tests to be part of the formula by which teachers are evaluated.
Standardized tests have a position in education. They give important information, but what we're dealing with is what we do with that information. Do we take a test score and say, well, this child is failing, or do we say, let's look at this test score and find out what his weaknesses are or her weaknesses are and use it as a diagnosis? I'm of the opinion that standardized tests do have a purpose, but I think the general public looks at them as the end point, not the beginning point.
And it's interesting because I'm sure you may have heard that Superintendent Tom Torlakson, state of California, he is actually called to eliminate some state standardized tests for 2nd grade, 9th grade, 10th grade in English and math. That's a very bold move.
You need to look at what the pundits are saying and what the educators are saying. The pundits are saying that the public wants to have a test score on each school,
Right.
level.
APIs.
Yeah, all that type of stuff. Educators say, well, what about educating the kids? What is happening in the classroom? Are we spending all of our time pouring information into the heads of children so they can pass a test, or are we truly educating them to be self-educators?
There's no doubt that over the last 10, 12 years, there has been an increased emphasis on teaching to the test. I mean, we have seen that. We hear that hue and cry up and down the state of California. And at a certain point, there are now protests breaking out. In Texas, Seattle, some teachers went on a boycott. This really is getting to be quite charged that we are not teaching kids to learn, we're teaching kids to take tests.
And I agree with that. I'm going to say that maybe this might not make me very popular, but I have always been a progressive when it comes to education.
Which means what, though?
Okay. I want to create a 21st century school. We are not in the machine age anymore. We're in the information age. And children coming into the classroom from the very start to the finish in 12th grade have hundreds of sources of information outside the classroom. No longer are we having these kids go down the line and we're pouring things in their head. Now we're saying we have to allow them to find out the information and be able to evaluate the information and then come up with a solution. And one of the big issues right now is what is being asked by society and by the business world, collaboration. And that's an overused term right now, but what does it mean? Well, basically it means that people solve problems collaboratively, not individually. And are we really setting up classrooms that promote that type of collaborative discussions?
Well, the new buzz term I hear is project-based learning, which allegedly creates more collaboration. You're not gearing towards a test, you're gearing towards a long-term project, which you often conduct with fellow students. That, you know, in a lot of ways sounds appealing, but we still have that SAT on the other end, and we have the MCAT and the LSAT and the, you know, GRE, and so there seems to be a lot of conflicting signals on this question.
What you have to ask yourself, and I'll ask you.
Please.
How does a child learn? What is the essence of learning?
Well, and I appreciate you saying that. You know, I have two daughters, 5th grade and 3rd grade, and I will say they are very different learners. They are vastly different learners, and it is remarkable that they come from the same home. My wife and I have raised them in the same manner, and yet my eldest daughter needs tremendous organization, clear direction. My other daughter is much more at ease with I guess you could say, a kind of a project-based approach. It's not that my older daughter doesn't have the ability to create projects, but she likes clear lines.
And that is the key to the success of teaching in the classroom. You've got to decide that different kids have different modes of learning, and you have to provide lessons that take into account all those modes of learning.
But what's interesting is, and I just use my daughters as a metaphor because, you know, I'm but one person in California. You know, my daughter, my eldest, she kind of thrives in this whole notion of a standardized test world because she's able to, you know, see the goal at the end and check off the boxes, and she knows what she needs to do. My other daughter, not so much. So, you know, if they're in the same classroom, the teacher is kind of in a difficult spot.
And when we talk about educational reform, we have to start at the beginning. We start with the preparation that teachers have. And that is changing. That is having a revolutionary change. We are looking at not just teaching curriculum, but teaching classroom management skills so that
life skills.
Well, actually, it's more than that. What do you do with groups of kids that are as disparate as you say? What do you do with those children? Well, what you do is you provide lessons that take in both learning modes.
Sir, I do want to ask you, though, about standardized tests and using those tests as part of a teacher evaluation. What's your sense?
The public is demanding it.
In a lot of ways they are.
And I don't think we can continue not looking at it. However, evaluation of teachers has to go through a revolutionary change, and it begins with the colleges and how they're taught. Not just curriculum, but classroom management and classroom skills. Actually doing what we were talking about, looking at the different modes of learning in the classroom and making sure that everybody is using those modes.
What's happening at Garvey as an example?
Okay. We have a big disconnect between myself and the superintendent. I believe that the most important part of a teacher's evaluation should be process. What are they doing in the classroom? How are they designing their lesson plans to reach those disparate types of learning? What are the kids doing together? What projects are they working on? Our superintendent wants the evaluation done on products. What does the teacher put in the lesson plan? What is up on the board?
It's a constant debate. You'll have to come back. We'll talk more specifically, but this was a great conversation. I'm glad you came on, honestly. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.